Stan Goldstein. I grew up in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, born there. With my brother and another person, we started CVS. I lived in a tenement house on Burnside Avenue, a three-decker. We lived on the second floor. My grandmother and aunt lived on the third floor.
I'm Mullen Sawyer. I'm the president and CEO of Oak Hill Community Development Corporation here in Worcester, Massachusetts. The triple-decker model itself is really great. There's a front porch, a back porch, 3 levels of apartments on top of one another, and the 3-deckers were built for the folks who worked in the factories and worked in the mom and pop stores so that they could walk to work and walk to religious services in the weekend and create community life.
My name is Safia Bashir Hirsi, and I'm basically born in Ethiopia, but I'm from Somalia. I moved into a 3-story apartment, and it was my first time to live that kind of apartment. It was new, and it was a surprise to me. I became a neighbor, people who have not been seen a lot of color people.
Growing up, of course, I personally lived in a 3-decker with 5 families. 1 unit on the first floor, 2 in the second, 2 on the third floor. We lived in the 3rd floor rear, and they used to collect rent on a weekly basis in Woonsocket, not monthly. And my recollection is our rent was between $4 and $5 a week.
My name is Joseph Volpe. I live at 36 Stanton Street, Worcester, Massachusetts. This 3-decker is 34 and 36. The first floor is 34, the second 2 apartments are 36 Stanton Street. Well, when I was around 12 years old, my parents, we lived in a 6-family home not far from here, and they thought the best way to do it was to purchase a 3-family home and to have a couple of rents and to help support the mortgage payments. The emotional bonds of being here and living here, are the reasons I'm still here.
In our particular tenement, there was 2 bedrooms, and they were cell-like because everything was off a huge, good-sized kitchen. 1 bathroom. Bathroom had no windows. This was truly a tenement. We were in a strip where there were like 6 3-deckers in a row.
The interior of the 3-decker has a Janus-like quality to it. I think the architects or the builders intended the rooms to have formal Victorian functions. The front room, the parlor, the middle room, perhaps a dining room. The rear rooms were the bedrooms. But in fact, with large immigrant families, this was not often the case. The dining room became a bedroom, or the living room, the parlor became the dining room, or the bedrooms were doubled up into multiple residents' bedrooms.
I would always visit my grandmother, who was on the 3rd floor, so it was simple walking up 1 flight of stairs from where we lived, and we'd do errands for her if she needed something to the grocery store and stuff like that. So it was like living together but living separately.
My grandparents lived in a 3-decker, as did my mother, and it's always been a source of fascination, which is amplified by the fact that I went to school in Worcester College at Clark, a city full of 3-deckers.
To be frank with you, I never thought of coming to the United States. Unknown to me, this friend of mine, who is now a professor, filled in this form of, they call it lottery, National Visa Lottery. And then I think about several months later, I got a package. Congratulations, big one like this, congratulations. You and your family qualify to come over to the United States of America.
I began to sort of specialize in three-decker research. It became, at least for Eastern Massachusetts, if not for much of New England, the go-to multiple family housing stock for the immigrant housing.
Prince, my wife, and the entire family of the O'Brien came over to the United States.
I believe triple deckers have a political function, if you will, in the sense that when, in the research on the Bread and Roses strike, in Lawrence in 1912, in the research on the strike that followed, you can see when you look at something as fascinating as the arrest records, people coming out of blocks and engaging in strike activity, you definitely have a sense of ownership of the place. You don't have the atomization that ultimately suburban life, Levitt towns, and other things create. The triple deckers and the community that they foster lend themselves to people being together in more public spaces and in more public ways.
The strike in Lawrence in 1912, known as the Bread and Roses strike, was a real explosion in American history. But in Lawrence, what became interesting was that because of the dense population, because of the triple deckers, you had all sorts of different ethnicities living together. It was immigrants and so-called unskilled workers who went to strike, not the usual AFL craft unions. So until that moment, most strikes and most labor organizing and labor unions had been generated and propelled by skilled laborers and by the whole idea that there was a difference between skilled, the aristocracy of labor, and the less skilled immigrant workers and just the sort of proletariat that was not of use to labor unions, which included women. Because women shared these female responsibilities, the traditional responsibilities of food preparation and laundry and childcare, why didn't they talk to each other? They had to talk to each other. And what that meant for me and for the strike was a new way of thinking about how solidarity came about, not through the unions or even through the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. Solidarity really began to come about at the local grocery stores where women operated. It came about through the sharing of these traditional responsibilities through women and comparing wage packets. But when women were coming home, there was Italians and Syrians and Lithuanians all kind of comparing at the local grocery store and then bringing that conversations into the tenements. And that was reinforced when I began to look at who was arrested during the strike. And I began to then find out through the manuscript census schedules where these women lived. So I had 85 women arrested during the strike, and they all lived in communities pretty much near each other, but about 20 of them lived on top of each other. They all lived in the same tenements.
With the front porch, and you sat on the front porch and you just watched the cars go by. Whoever's going, oh, hi, Miss So-and-so, and you start talking. And so you commune that way. And sitting on the front porch, also, you'd have your dessert, maybe after dinner, sitting out on the front porch, having your dessert. And you talk with each other and have friends, and you'd be speaking to people that are driving by. And so it was all communal.
I met with the elders, the Somali elders, and I met with the officials from the city of Portland, and housing had become saturated in Portland. So they said, do you think you, the city of Lewiston, could accommodate a few families coming into the city? I said, sure, no problem. Well, lo and behold, did I know it was more than a few families. It was the fastest influx, the more families coming into any one place at any particular time.
At one point I had 1,000 units. I'm down to 300, right about 300. I don't even know how many we have. But percentage of that are immigrant, probably, maybe right now, 25, 30%.
Without those triple deckers, you know, I don't know where these folks would have found housing.
When the Somalian people came here, the financial reality of it was like a boom. It was good, because now having 30, 40% vacant buildings, now you could fill them.
This is my home. It's been a family home for years, so it was my parents' home and originally an aunt's home who had the house built in 1924. These buildings were becoming empty, and now they're full again. This would be an empty, boarded up city without these immigrants. So I think some people don't realize how much positive impact they've had because of that.
But the first real wave of immigrants was the Irish. So when the French Canadians started coming in, it wasn't funny because people, you know, the Irish burnt the French Canadian church down. They had big fights on the Main Street Bridge to the point where they would throw each other in the river. When they saw the young guys going up on Ash Street near the Basilica with their batons and whatnot, oh, the French and Irish are going to be rumbling and whatnot. People forgot that, you know, that happened then. So the strife that was happening today actually was kind of mild compared to what happened then.
A lot of white people who were occupying the same building as us, first of all, were in a state of shock. They were shocked. They didn't understand why all these people who looked very, very different and you know, religiously different, we were not going to churches like them. We were not wearing the same clothes. Our food smelled really like you cook goat meat and it doesn't come out of the hallways. It's there and it sticks there.
People had forgotten that we are a community of immigrants.
There was concern, particularly by the old established Yankee political stock, that the Three Deckers were affecting the property values or were bringing in the unwanted European immigrant population was quite strong, and many of the Boston suburbs, Arlington, Belmont, did put restrictions on three-family housing construction.
I have the Quran, I've read the Quran. I read these books because I wanted to understand how these people think and what makes them, you know, act the way they do, and how they're try to understand their culture. If you understand their culture, you can get along with them a lot better.
Well, there was a family that lived in a three-decker directly across the street from me, and they were Jewish. And they didn't, on the Sabbath, transact any money. So when I go to collect my paper route money, the lady would open the door and she would tell me, go into the pantry, and on the counter was the money along with a tip. On the way out, I would meet her two sons that were my age, and I would invite them to come play a baseball game we would play out on the street. And the two guys would say, nope, we have to read our books. We can't go, it's the Sabbath. And my friends and I, we didn't ridicule them or laugh at them, because being Catholic, the next day I was out there reading my book and I had to go to church to services. So they went to the synagogue, I went to the church, and we grew up that way. And I look back on it now and I reflect how tolerant we were of each other's differences.
After the First World War, there were multitudes of three-deckers built, particularly in the established cities, like Worcester, like Haverhill, like Lawrence, like Brockton, like New Bedford, Southbridge, Massachusetts, Waterbury, Connecticut. But again, the elaboration of the architectural styles was minimalized just because the labor costs had run up so high.
As the post-World War II period progresses, Lawrence's population falls quite dramatically from 85,000, 90,000 to pushing around 55,000, 60,000. And so a lot of housing, a lot of triple-deckers become vacant. And then the cities like Lawrence begin to conceive of, okay, well, maybe we should take down some of these neighborhoods and we can build industrial parks or high-rises or whatever. And maybe that will attract a new group of people back into the city. And so in many respects, in the eyes of city developers and planners, triple-deckers become expendable.
Oh, they knocked the porches down, and the porches are nice, but he just tore them down instead of repairing them. And the same thing with these. These are about to go too. I don't know, he can't knock these down. But he's just planning to put what he was saying, just plywood down and try and just stabilize instead of bringing it back. to where it was. And in other words, he just doesn't care about the house, and it's a shame because it's a nice house.
In the 40s and 50s, the industry that's in Lawrence and in Lowell is finally exiting once and for all. So the population now shrinks because if anybody's able, they follow the work. That basically creates empty triple-deckers.
Not only did Dominicans and Puerto Ricans not bring poverty to Lawrence, this urban crisis, this widespread economic decline in the city actually preceded their arrival, and it was something they then had to reckon with. Latino settlement was constrained, one might say segregated, within the boundaries of Lawrence, specifically by the geography, the landscape, the built environment of the city and its suburbs. That Lawrence, with its triple deckers, with its subsidized housing projects from after World War II, Lawrence provided access to rental housing, to apartments that the suburbs had been intentionally built to exclude. Urban renewal in the post-war decades, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, was an explicit attempt by city elites to get out the old and draw in some new, to get rid of what existed in Lawrence, to draw in new capital, new resources, new residents to the city. And it failed. It wasn't until the people already here had the resources and the support to transform the city that renaissance really occurred.
I needed a point of entry into the market. My partners and I, we all identified that there was no sustainable way yet proposed as to how to renovate a triple-decker that would cause a lasting positive impact.
I used to live in the three-decker, the one right behind the camera, until we got kicked out by Sustainable Comfort. Companies are buying up properties and they're kicking out the people that live in them.
Never feels good to walk into someone's home, to introduce yourself as the new owner and say, you can't stay. We've approached this from multiple perspectives. One, we want to preserve the neighborhood from kind of a meta sense. It's less about if we can preserve every casing, every detail in a kitchen, but more about how do we preserve what the triple-decker represented in a neighborhood, which was high-density, accessible living.
I used to live here on the 3rd floor, and I was one of the people that was asked to move out when they came and renovated the place for, I guess, for the new biotech crowd that's coming in.
One of the dangerous things about focusing on the built environment and improving those buildings is that that creates a need to increase rental rates, which has social impacts. The people who lived in this building before were a very different demographic than who are moving in now. So I don't think of it as displacement in that way, but more as kind of an introduction of another possible demographic